Bodywise and PerfectSize.com is proud to bring you an interview with Professor Linda Bacon. A health professor, she holds graduate degrees in physiology, psychology, exercise metabolism, and has a speciality in nutrition. She's an internationally recognized author on topics related to nutrition, weight, and health, and an internationally recognized researcher who's conducted federally funded studies on diet and health and has been published in top scientific journals. Linda, how did your interest in health at every size start?
Really, I was just trying to get out of my own hell. I think when I was younger, I had this idea that I was too fat and that there was something wrong with being fat, and that if only I could find the right diet or exercise plan or do everything right, I could get thinner. And I believed all these other ideas that not only could I get thinner if I did the right thing, but that then suddenly everybody would love me and I would get the respect of friends and my parents and family. And so there was a lot riding on that. And unfortunately, what it did was it just made me kind of obsessed and uncomfortable around food and made me look at my body as the enemy. And I spent years fighting my body. Along the way, I discovered that those old ideas that if we just diet right, exercise right, that somehow we're going to have that perfectly thin body and the love of everybody in the world, I found out along the way that none of that is true, that there's this whole fantasy it's built on. And what I realized was the trick was to learning how to love myself, and that was the starting point for then being able to take much better care of my body.
How did taking better care of yourself change things?
Everything else seemed to fall into place. It was a lot easier to eat in a way that was supportive of a healthy body when you like it. And when you're looking at food as something to nourish yourself and to feel good about, takes away all the food as medicine stuff and allows you to eat better and appreciate food more. While it started out personal, turned into a very academic journey as well, because I had to learn the science for how to do all of this.
I know you've had many important turning points in this journey.
Let me just tell you one that really shook up my whole faith in academics as providing us with the answers that we need. I still remember this day. It was June 1998, and one night 29 million Americans went to bed in perfectly healthy bodies, but they woke up fat with a medical diagnosis that they were supposed to get some help, like go on diets or take drugs. What happened was, of course, not that everybody gained weight overnight, but that was the day that the United States lowered the obesity standards, so that suddenly all these people that were in the category that was previously called normal weight were suddenly in either overweight or obese categories. Then their doctors were supposed to tell them to go lose weight and put them on diets or drugs or something else. At the time, I was hard at work for my PhD dissertation, which was all about weight and health. And I was just shocked that the U.S. government would have lowered the standards. So I called somebody who happened to be on the National Institute of Health panel for the obesity task force that had made the recommendation to the government to lower the BMI standard. And I asked her, how come you did this? And it wasn't too hard for me to have access to her because she happened to be my PhD mentor at the time. And she said, I know that you've been studying all of this stuff and that you have to be writing this up for your dissertation right now. So she said, how about if you just hand in what you've been working on for me, and what I'd like you to do is to pretend that you were on the panel in my stead. So I want you to gather all the data that you've done together and figure out what you think is the most important stuff we should have analyzed to figure out the relationship between weight and health, and what your recommendation would be based on that data you've gathered. And my conclusion was basically that we should be raising the standards quite dramatically as opposed to lowering them. And I handed it in to her, and I was surprised when she gives it back to me and she says, Linda, this is absolutely brilliant. If I could give you your PhD right now, I would. And I said to her, but I don't get it. It's the exact opposite of what your panel decided on. And she said, oh no, we actually identified all the same research you did as being the most important, and we came to the exact same conclusion you did. And I said, I don't get it. So why was your report so different? And she said, well, in the end, we got a lot of political pressure on us to conform to standards that were already out there that were set by the World Health Organization. And so we did. And it hit me so hard that nobody really cares about health. This is really all about politics. I got really curious then as to, well, why would the World Health Standards be based on bad science? And so I contacted the World Health Organization and I asked them, how do you come up with your recommendations? And they told me that the recommendations came from the International Obesity Task Force. I then looked up to find out information about what that group was. And basically, they're a privately funded group, and the two leading funders at the time were the only two pharmaceutical companies that had weight loss drugs out on the market. It's the pharmaceutical industry that wrote our current BMI standards. And of course, they make a lot of money off of it because now a lot more people are candidates for their drug treatment. Because what it said to me was that politics play a role in why we believe what we do and why we tell people to do the things that they do. And this is not about caring about people's health. And it helped to put everything into perspective, why all of the messages I'd been reading about weight all along were just not based on solid evidence. And it really helped me to be a lot more open-minded to trusting people's experience, to being able to look at data as opposed to the conclusions of reports and see if the data actually tells us something very different from the conclusions of the reports. And when you do all of that, what you find is that much of what we say is true about weight is not. And that there's a much different perspective we can have that respects people and that works.
Linda, you and Professor Lucy Apremore recently wrote an amazing article called Weight Science, Evaluating the Evidence for a Paradigm Shift. It was published in the Nutrition Journal. Can you tell me a little bit more about that, please?
Lucy and I wrote it because we wanted to have that academic credibility. And so people that want to actually read the article itself can go to my website and you'll find a link to it. Lucy and I also co-authored a book. It's called Body Respect, What Conventional Health Books Get Wrong, Leave Out, and Just Plain Fail to Understand About Weight. So we look at all of those ideas that we've been led to believe about weight and actually look at the data and dissect it. So for example, that whole idea that obesity is killing us. We actually look at the data, and what we find is that the vast majority of studies that are looking at weight and longevity actually find that people in the overweight category are the people that live the longest, and that people at most levels of what we call obesity are living at least as long, if not longer, than people that are in that normal weight category. Then we also look at other myths, like the whole idea that if you're heavier, that causes disease. And what we find there is that while it's certainly true that there are some diseases that are more commonly found among heavier people, when you start to dissect it, you find that it's issues other than weight that play a larger causative role. And that weight itself is relatively benign. I'm not going to say it doesn't play any role. Its role in health is very wildly exaggerated. And that there's a lot of other things that we have much more control over that play a role in health, like fitness levels and stress levels and discrimination and things like that.
Linda, can you tell me more about your first book, Health at Every Size, The Surprising Truth About Your Weight?
It talks about the academic arguments, and the second half is all just supporting people in how to find the habits that are going to support you in being able to enjoy and appreciate your body, make good food choices, etc. Like the more recent book, it also breaks down a lot of the myths and helps people to understand things like the idea that diets don't work and they're just not designed to work. That the whole idea that we can cognitively control our weight, that we can just decide, well, I'm going to eat less and that's going to result in losing weight, is just not supported by science. What we know when we study it scientifically is that when people drop their calories and do try to control their weight, and there are a lot of people who have great willpower and can actually do that, that the body responds oftentimes by just cutting the amount of calories it spends and compensating. So if you eat less, it just spends less, and eating less might actually result in you gaining weight as opposed to losing weight. Once people understand more about the science, they can recognize that they're not failures at dieting, that it's dieting that fails us.
Diets basically tell us not to trust our bodies. What would you say to that?
One of the things that we also know is that your body does have a very successful weight regulation system built in. Your body's going to guide you to eating well and exercising regularly, and it's going to tell you when to eat and when to stop eating. And the more you can get in sync with yourself and just respect that, you allow your body to take care of your weight, and your weight will naturally fall at a place that's good for you. We're all designed differently, and some of us are just meant to be heavier. And it is so much more fun to do that rather than fight yourself all the time.
It sounds like what I think of as being body-wise and perfect size, the size that's naturally right for you.
We're biologically set up to get rewarded by eating. Food tastes good. That makes sense. Comes from an evolutionary perspective. If we didn't eat, we would die. Yeah. So it would be nice if we can just celebrate that, as opposed to thinking that our hunger drive is something that's going to destroy us and bad, and that we're supposed to keep in check.
Linda, you also did some really important federally funded research.
National Institute of Health, as well as the United States Department of Agriculture, gave us support for it. What I've done is I've done a research study where we suggested to women that they can trust themselves, and we supported them in dumping the diet habit that they've had all their lives, and instead learning how to get back to all of those innate signals. And we found some pretty phenomenal things. What we found is that when women give up dieting, that no, they don't gain weight, but instead they gain a sense of agency and appreciation for food again, and that they take on better habits. What's interesting too is that we were able to support women in eating more nutritious foods, but they weren't eating them because they were on a diet or because they were supposed to eat their fiber. They were eating them because this is what they were drawn to and what they wanted. You know, we help people make the connections between what foods help them to feel good. In the traditional nutrition world, you tell everybody to eat their fruits and veggies because they're high in fiber and fiber is good for you. And so then fruits and veggies become like medicine that you're supposed to eat, right? But instead, what we do is we support people in finding out how foods affect them and what helps them to feel good. And when women can start to make the connections to the fact that when they don't eat any fiber, they're constipated and they're uncomfortable and they don't sustain their energy throughout the day. On the other hand, when they eat foods that are high in fiber, they're less moody and they have more sustained energy, more comfortable bowel movements, that it just feels better. And for these reasons, then, they gravitate towards foods that contain fiber, and then they look for things that contain fiber that are really enjoyable to them. So that's also going to support them in eating well. The results of our research study, and the research has been replicated by many, many other people, consistently show that when you dump the diet habit and instead you just key into your body, that you can learn to regain sensitivity to all of those cues. It guides you to doing a better job nutritionally, and also, most importantly, I think, it guides you to enjoy food more.
Linda, you also did some health outcome measures. What were your findings there?
All of this stuff has pretty dramatic health improvements. We saw improvements in self-esteem. We saw improvements in blood pressure, improvements in HDL levels. That's a cholesterol carrier in the bloodstream. And it was pretty exciting to see that not just psychological improvements and behavioral improvements, but also many physiologic improvements.
Linda, can you tell us about the Health at Every Size movement, HAES?
Health at Every Size movement was thriving long before I ever came onto the scene. And I'm actually a latecomer to it. But I think that one thing that I've done is I've helped to put it on the map more. But there's a thriving health at every size movement, and there's people who have been looking at health at every size from a lot of different perspectives. There's even a professional trade organization called ASDA, the Association for Size Diversity in Health. There are thousands of people around the world right now, fitness trainers, physicians, dietitians, psychotherapists, attorneys, etc., that are all working from this model. And the basic model is all just about helping people to respect the bodies that they're in and take good care of them. And also to name the fact that we live in a culture which doesn't provide that support, and that weight stigma is a really big problem that gets in the way of people being able to take good care of themselves.
And Linda, the effects of stress are huge. Can you speak to that?
There's research that shows that when people feel bad about themselves, they're more likely to binge eat. There's research studies that show that if you don't like your body, and then you're less likely to exercise. And people that lead hard lives, that this gets embedded in us on a cellular level. Your body, for example, releases a lot of cortisol, which is a stress hormone. Releasing a lot of cortisol could result in increased risk for heart disease, for diabetes, and for many of the diseases that we tend to blame on obesity. In fact, I would say that there's a much stronger connection between weight stigma causing the diseases that we blame on weight than there is for weight itself being problematic.
So how do we go about making these changes, Linda?
It seems like we always have to be working on both levels. On the one hand, we have to recognize that discrimination is not okay, and we've got to move more towards cultural change of respecting people in whatever body that they have. Doesn't mean that everybody's in a body that's at the perfect weight for them. But what it does mean is that regardless of whether you're at a weight that's good for you or not, that you can start from a place of just living in that body that you have and taking good care of it. While we're working for cultural change, we also have to figure out, so how do individuals make it in this world that isn't so respectful? And so people can also at the same time be developing their own skills for being able to manage this unfair world, for being able to recognize that their bodies are not the problem. The culture is the problem. And we need to find more places where we can celebrate people in whatever bodies they have, increase the images of what it means to be beautiful out there in the world, so that it's not just about thin bodies, but we can also see the beauty in larger bodies. We need to bust those stereotypes that good things only happen to thin people, and recognize that there are lots of people in larger bodies that are living fulfilled, happy lives, very successful.
Linda, you've done a lot to provide resources for large people.
Well, one of my goals is to provide as much supportive material for people to be able to make this size acceptance journey. The appendix to Health at Every Size, you'll find letters that you can take to your doctor, to your fitness trainer, to your teachers at schools, to school administrators, to people in public office, that are short bullet point arguments to help them to change the paradigm.
Linda, there are some changes happening at the moment in the dieting industry, aren't there?
We have two parallel ideas happening right now. On the one hand, we promote dieting, and there's a lot of people that are trying it. And on the other hand, there's also this theme that comes out in media a lot, that diets don't work. And there's challenge to it. And it seems like both are happening simultaneously. And the way the diet industry has responded to it is they're basically just co-opting the vocabulary of the non-diet movement and say, oh yeah, diets don't work. That's why we're a healthy lifestyle plan instead. And so places like Weight Watchers, for example, are now trying to just use new vocabulary for the same old stuff. There's cracks in the armor right now. There's enough out there that's challenging this idea of dieting at the same time that people aren't ready to give up dieting. And I think that this is how paradigm shifts happen. That for a while, you hear both movements asserting themselves. And then there's a point where you realize that they can't peacefully coexist, that this is actually a paradigm shift, that it's not a different way of doing things, that what we're saying is the old ideas just don't work and that they're not designed to work. But I also think that dieting plays on people's vulnerabilities and fears, that so many people believe that there's something wrong with their bodies and that they'll get so much more if they have thinner bodies, that it's really hard to let go of kind of a lifeline that they think dieting can connect them to their dreams. What we have to do is help people to see that they can get their dreams. Because really what people are looking for is they're looking to be happy, right? And they're told that thinness is the way to do it. And what we have to help people to see that there's lots of ways to be happy. You don't have to do it through thinness. And it's much more achievable if you try to get at it directly as opposed to using weight as a mediator, right? But what we know is that they don't have to give up on their dreams. They can get everything that they're looking for, but that the journey to getting it is very different from what they've been led to believe. The trade-off of is that they're telling people the only way to get your dreams is through this diet. And they exploit people's insecurities. The fact that we don't have what we're looking for is not because people haven't tried to diet. They haven't tried to do the things they've been told to do. There are a lot of really good dieters out there. Dieting just doesn't deliver. Got all that internal wisdom that says that that's not the answer. But what the diet industry tells us is don't trust ourselves, trust them. And so we need to take our power back. And we need to recognize, that we've got the answers. They don't. There's not a commercial fix for this dilemma that we're all in.
Linda, one of the things I most admire about you is that you've created so many free and easily accessible documents on the web, which I know you'd like to encourage people to use, so they can be found at the Health for Every Size book website, on the Body Respect website, and also at your own personal website, where you've got a fabulous resources tab that allows people to search and filter for very specific information. Thank you so much for joining me today, Linda.
Well, Carrie, I just want to support you in what you do. We're all just trying to get this message of love and support out there, and we're all in this together. So I just want to honor our community, what we all do to just kind of make this a more compassionate, caring, evidence-based world. So thank you for what you do, for giving a platform for these ideas, and this is how the world changes.